Earlier this year, I was in the market for a telephoto zoom lens and I decided to pick up the Tamron 70-180mm zoom lens. Now, if you had asked me about this lens and if I regretted getting it, my original answer would be no, but due to some recent news development, that answer might change a little bit. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the Tamron 70-180. It's a lightweight and compact lens that's sharp at f2.8 and focuses with decent speed. I pretty much knew the downsides of this lens before buying it, such as not having an option for a teleconverter, no optical stabilization, and no focus mode switch. These were no surprises. As I'm looking through SonyAlphaRumors.com to see what the latest rumors are, I see topics around the 70-200mm lens from time to time. I'm a big fan of Sigma lenses, especially with their art series, and I'm surprised that they don't have a native E-mount that's a 70-200 or a 70-180. And earlier this week, Sony has announced their new 70-200 f2.8 G Master Mark II lens that is sharper, 30% lighter, and focuses 4 times faster compared to the original one. And after all that, I'm still pretty happy with the Tamron 70-180mm f2.8 lens. So just a little bit of history before we continue of how I got to this point. I first got started in photography with Nikon DSLRs and did that for about 13 years up until 2019, and then I made a jump from Nikon to the Sony system. Now when you're buying a camera, you're really buying into the system, so I had accumulated a bunch of Nikon gear, including lenses, and then it was kind of painful switching from Nikon to Sony. And I'm not going to get too much into it, but basically I didn't want to use any adapters for my F-mount lenses, and I wanted to buy E-mount lenses so that it's native to the system I'm using. If you're into portrait photography, a lot of times photographers will go to a medium telephoto to a telephoto lens, and that's because of a couple of reasons. First, it minimizes distortions caused by the lens. So for example, if you had a wide angle lens and you zoomed out to, let's say, 20 millimeters, 18 millimeters, or even 14 millimeters, that kind of range will cause people's faces to start being pulled to the side of the lens. If you're off center, it makes people's noses big, and you don't want that to happen in a portrait photo, unless that's the effect that you're actually trying to go for. Most of the time people try to avoid that. And the second reason is that you have a shallow depth of field, which is the blurry background that a lot of people like with these wide aperture medium telephoto or telephoto lens. So for me personally, one of my favorites is the 85mm range, and here we have the Nikon 85mm 1.4 Type D lens for the Nikon cameras. And this is an older lens, being a Type D lens, and I liked it so much that when I switched over to the Sony system, I bought the Sigma version of the 85 1.4. This is the Sigma 85 1.4 from their art series of lenses, and you can argue that this has a built-in MC11 adapter if you're familiar with those, but this is all together, which is very nice. Now, there is a newer version of the 85 1.4, which is nice because it's a smaller version, still an f1.4 lens, and instead of an 86mm filter mount, it does a standard 77mm, so smaller footprint, weighs less, I believe, and then also performs very well from what I've heard. Never used it, but I really like the 85 1.4, though this is kind of big and heavy. Now, the other choice that a lot of photographers might go to is like a 70-200 2.8 lens. So instead of a 1.4 aperture, when you add in zoom, you sacrifice on some of the light collecting ability, and so you bump up from a 1.4 to a 2.8, but it's a 2.8 consistent aperture throughout the whole zoom range. Now the 70-200s are often a lot bigger than this, right? This is a 70-180, so you get a little bit less of a range, but I don't really miss that last 20mm of zoom ability. I used to own a Nikon 70-200mm f2.8 VR Mark II lens, but I've sold that since I jumped over to the Sony E-mount system, and I've sort of replaced that with the 70-180 lens from Tamron. So this 70-180, as you can see here, has a constant aperture of f2.8, which is really nice. And this kind of blurs the line between a prosumer and a professional lens. And it's kind of like the first lens of its kind, because a traditional 70-200 lens is bigger, heavier, and more expensive than this. So now you have a high-performing lens that's cheaper and lighter compared to its rivals. And when you look at the price, it's not just a little bit cheaper. You're talking $1,200 for the full price compared to a hefty price tag of $2,500, depending on which one you're comparing to. Sigma, on the other hand, for some reason, I think for the last couple of years, there's some rumors saying that they're coming out with their own 70-200 lens for the Sony E-mount that's native to that. Doesn't require any adapters, but it's been kind of crickets since then. So rumors say that they have some autofocusing problems that they're dealing with, but I don't know if Sigma is going to compare with that, or if they'll run with something along the lines of a traditional f2.8 lens that's a 70-200, but I guess only time will tell. I've talked to a Sigma rep and didn't get any information. Unfortunately, they said that they don't have any insight into their roadmaps and when the lens will be released, but they said that they are working on something. But as of now, nothing solid as of yet. If Sigma is planning to build a lens that will directly compete against the 70-180 from Tamron, there's a couple of things in my opinion that they can do to essentially one up against their competition. First thing being having a dedicated AF/MF switch. This will allow the photographer to quickly switch between autofocus and manual focus on their lens. So if you look at the Tamron lens, and as a matter of fact, a lot of their lenses don't have that AF/MF switch, I guess for a more cleaner look or for more, a compact setup. But I find that switch very useful. And if you look at the 85mm lens, over here, you'll see there's an AF/MF switch that will allow you to quickly switch between the two modes. And I find that incredibly useful. And maybe I'll get roasted for this, but I don't actually use the AF on button on the back of the camera. So if I wanted to hit the shutter button, the focusing would be triggered from that as well. The functions are combined. The second thing I think Tamron can be improved on, and Sigma can maybe outshine Tamron in this sense, is its manual focusing experience. At least on the 70-180 lens, the focusing is done by a drive-by-wire system, meaning that the manual focus ring is electronically controlling the lens elements when you're trying to manual focus. There's nothing physically attaching the focusing ring to the lens element when you twist this, so this is all computerized, except the problem is that when you're changing the focus with the ring, depending on how fast you're moving it, when you're moving it faster, it will accelerate the focusing much quicker. And since it's not really linear, and I know this is like really hard to kind of understand if you haven't experienced it before, but hear me out. Because it's not linear, it can cause you to miss your focus points if you're trying to do a rack focus effect in your video. So for example, if you're focusing on something that's far to something near, depending on the speed, even though you move the ring the same distance, it may not focus back to the position that you want. Now contrast that with the Sigma lens. Now, I have this in manual mode right now, but if you look at the focusing window, which the Tamron does not have, if I turn the focusing ring, you can see that the distance kind of corresponds with the how far I'm twisting the lens, right? So if I twist it quickly, but to the same points, it's still going back and forth to the same points, but because the Tamron lens is not linear, that doesn't happen. So I'll show you a couple of clips on what I mean by how hard it is to manually focus. Yeah, there's all the cons of this lens. So for example, the lack of image stabilization on the lens itself, but for me, IBIS is good enough. The lens also doesn't internally zoom so that may impact the weather sealing ability, even though on the back here I do see a gasket around the mount, but then again, I don't shoot in the rain, so that doesn't really bother me. But there's a lot of good points in terms of the pros for this lens, right? The things that I've listed, where the lens is compact, lightweight, and relatively affordable compared to the professional grade 70-200 2.8 lenses. Also, this lens focuses pretty close, which is, I think, from what I heard, kind of rare in this class of lenses, right? So I'll post this rose I took a picture of that was maybe a couple of feet away or something. I was really close, and I think with my Nikon 70-200, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Even though I don't regret getting this lens, I do wish that there are other lens manufacturers such as, Sigma, Tokina, Rokinon that would kind of play into this space and would give you different options when you're comparing these 70-180 or the 70-200 lenses. Because even if Sigma puts out a native E-mount lens that's a full-size 70-200 f2.8, at least that would be a different option to pick from compared to, let's say, the Sony 70-200 f2.8 G Master lens. And that's all I got for today's video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as always, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.